In fact, meanwhile, Israeli military has begun their ground offensive in Gaza City after launching airstrikes in Qatar. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu did not rule out further strikes on Hamas leaders wherever they are. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio on Monday backed Israel's new offensive on Gaza City and its goal of eradicating Hamas on his visit to Jerusalem. Rubio also took a dim view of the Qatari brokered negotiations for a ceasefire, despite Trump last month predicting an end to the war within weeks. Now, Rubio will travel to Doha on Tuesday to reaffirm America's full support for the Gulf state's sovereignty. He called on Qatar to continue to play a constructive role in resolving the Gaza conflict, saying it could help reach the goals of releasing all 48 hostages still held in Gaza, disarming Hamas, and building a better future for the Gazans. While Qatar is home to the largest U.S. air base in the region. And turning towards U.S. President Donald Trump's comments on the issue, he warned Hamas on Monday that all bets are off. He also said that he has read a news report that Hamas was going to move the hostages above ground to use them as human shields. Trump repeated his assertion that Israel will not be striking Qatar again.
He won't be hitting Qatar, but he will be maybe going after. Now, there was an article that I read in a newspaper just about an hour ago where Hamas said they're going to use the 20 hostages as human shields. They're going to bring them up from the dark tunnels, and they're going to put them in the line of fire so that if Israel goes forward, they're going to die. And I thought that was very terrible, and I put out a statement on that. You saw that.
And for more on this, we have Shubhendu Ghosh joining us. Well, Shubhendu, given the complexities of the U.S. diplomacy in the region right now, how do you think Rubio's support for Israel's offensive and his stance on Qatar's role could affect peace negotiations, especially with Qatar's involvement in both supporting Gaza's sovereignty and serving as a mediator for ceasefire talks?
Hello, Lipakshi. We have to see that the Israeli action that happened in Qatar, in Doha, the casualties of it, the real casualties besides some of the Hamas operatives and personnel of Qatar, one of the casualties has been the peace process, the peace negotiation. Whatever little was earned in the past weeks with Qatar acting as an important mediator between the warring parties appear to have been lost. Now, the key mediator, in fact, is in the process of, in fact, working towards a statement against Israel. You mentioned about the emergency summit of the Arab League and Organization of Islamic Cooperation. We see mediators now joining the leagues of, in fact, the adversary. So in that sense, the situation in the Middle East, in West Asia, has become more complex than before. Any opportunity for a peace negotiation seems to have taken a step back now significantly. Yes, Marco Rubio, Secretary of State of the United States, is visiting the region. He earlier on Monday visited Israel. Whatever little criticism that President Donald Trump had for Israeli action against Qatar seems to be overshadowed by messages of solidarity that Marco Rubio presented in Israel, which would also be heard very clearly by their allies in Qatar and elsewhere, where the Qatari expect that America would come out more strongly in their position, in their leverage against Israel, particularly vis-a-vis the action that Netanyahu took against Doha in trying to target Hamas. However, the kind of posturing that Marco Rubio has done, saying things like countries have the right to defend themselves, even beyond their boundaries, their Qatari allies would want to know what options does the U.S. have for Qatar and other countries who find themselves vulnerable, even as they support U.S. efforts in bringing peace to the region. So in that sense, the situation appears to have deteriorated. The Israeli action, meanwhile, continues in the Palestinian enclaves, going after Hamas, and President Trump also raising a flag about how the Israeli hostages may be used as human shield, really problematizing the situation. But here, the peace process and the peace talks really have taken a big setback with the unilateral Israeli action against Qatar last week.
Absolutely, Shubhendu. The situation is quite dire right now. But with the Gulf uniting against Israel, as we know, and with President Trump's recent comments on Hamas potentially using hostages as human shields, as they've said, how do you interpret the broader implications of his rhetoric on US-Israel relations, as well as on international diplomatic efforts to resolve this conflict?
One cannot imagine, Lipakshi, the kind of risks that the Israeli hostages have had to live through in the past months and year. And the risk against them continues. But the kind of strategic posturing that the adversaries have done, whether it's Israel, Hamas, or the United States, one really fails to read any real concern for the hostages. There appears to be a contest for strategic advantage for the warring sides, not real concerns. The Israeli hostages, Palestinian civilians, children in particular, appear to be victims that nobody really is looking at as far as real action is concerned. There is an interesting pivot that is happening in the international community against Israel that we can notice. We look at the UN vote, the New York declaration that happened earlier, overwhelmingly voting in favor of a two-state solution between Israel and Palestine, also pushing for peace in the region. We know that there is a certain ICC warrant against Prime Minister Netanyahu that prevails. The Arab and Islamic Summit is also expected to come out very strongly as far as their posturing, their statement against Israeli action is concerned. But we'll have to see to what extent can resolutions and action on paper prevent bullets and bombs from destroying Palestine and the civilians in particular. So in that sense, we'll have to wait and watch how the developments pan out from here. But the fact that the key mediators now are in fact joining the leagues of people who would want action against Israel does problematize the entire situation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Shubhendu, for all those details and explaining it so well.